Fundamentally, it's pointing to the belief that we believe we're all flawed and that we all need to be trained up in a way that orients us towards the good.
Welcome to Classical Etc. You're in the studio with Memoria Press.
Hello and welcome to Classical Etc. My name is Jessica Gardner and I'm here with the usual guests, Martin, Tanya, and Paul. How are we doing, everybody?
Page 790. I'm on page 790.
Okay, and what was last week's count?
709, maybe?
I think that's right.
What is
that
the count of?
War and Peace.
War and
I knew
Peace.
she was going to ask.
War
I
and
just thought I'd
Peace.
get it over with.
109.
Where-
So what, you were like 1/10 of a way through now?
No,
that's
I'm more than halfway.
Yes,
It's 1,200
That
pages.
gets you to eight out of 12, which I should be able to do my math better.
Oh.
4, 6, 2/3. It's 2/3 of the way through.
We did just talk about fast
Wow,
math
that
facts.
took forever.
Oh, let's not do math again.
No. And for anyone just joining us, we usually start our episodes with sharing what we're reading. So here we are.
I got
Tanya's
mine
still
over
on War and
with.
Peace.
We're still on War and Peace. I'm reading Cheryl Swope's essays also that we're going to publish in a book. And I had to read Mr. Popper's Penguins for novel thoughts.
Oh.
So I've been, reading a little more, but I really am at home only War and Peace.
Martin?
Well, we are looking at candidates for the Parnassus Prize in literature from Memoria College that we give out every year to a book that best furthers the classical liberal arts tradition. And so I'm reading several, but the one I'm spending the most time with right now, partly because it's the biggest book. There's books that are this big, and there's books that are this big, and the book Virtue Politics, Statecraft and Soulcraft in the Renaissance by James Hankins is a fascinating book, and it because it's about when we think of the idea of politics in the Middle Ages and political science, as we would call it, political philosophy is probably what they would have called it. We think of Machiavelli, and this very sort of strategic, tactical.
Who does think of Machiavelli, Martin?
Yeah,
I would support
Tanya
more
doesn't,
than
but
that.
virtually
Yes.
everybody else does.
Yes, I would support that statement.
And it's this sort of selfish enterprise by the means by which a politician can take control. I mean, that's really what Machiavelli is sort of characterized as. But in fact, he points out in this book, there's a very Christian consciousness about the way politics should be done in the Middle Ages. And it was the idea that it's not the structure of government, it's not that necessarily a republic or a democracy is better than an aristocracy. You can have a corrupt democracy just like you can have a corrupt aristocracy. It's not necessarily the form of government, it's the virtue of the leader. And so character education was hugely important in the Middle Ages. Because a good king, if a king is really good, you have a good government. If you have a democracy that's run by a bunch of demagogues, then you have a bad government. It's not necessarily the kind of government. So he's kind of just taking that thesis and working it several different ways, and it's just fascinating.
Is it really academic?
Well, it's an academic book. I mean, there's lots of quotations.
But is it
from
accessible
scholars,
to
but it's
somebody like me?
It's written very clearly, which is unusual in a lot of scholarly books. But there are, that's the kind of scholars I like. Is in you learn to kind of identify them over time as these scholars who can say stuff that's really interesting, but they can write sort of almost journalistically, and he does.
It's accessible.
James Hankins does, yeah.
Paul?
Absolutely nothing.
Well.
Now, that's the way I feel about how much I've read, but I I am reading and teaching on the nature of the gods right now, Cicero.
You're doing class prep. You're doing a lot of class prep.
Yeah, I am doing a lot of class prep.
Well, that's where you get a lot of your good reading done, really, because those are books that you have on your list to read.
Yeah,
but you're not going to read them unless you have to teach them.
Right, and so I am reading. It just doesn't feel like it's something that I'm reading for me.
Personal enrichment.
But I actually, the section that we just finished this week with the students I love it because he goes on and on and on. I mean, this is pages and pages and pages about the wonders of the natural world.
Who is this? Aristotle?
Cicero.
Oh.
Cicero's on the nature of the gods. But this is the Stoic speaker. So it's in sort of a dialogue form. And it's the Stoic speaker who's trying to make the case that the gods do order the universe. Because the Epicureans say, you know what? The gods are completely inactive. They're completely detached from our reality. And the Stoics are like, no. They're very much involved in our lives. And we can see that in the natural world. And I just love how he just goes on and on and on about the constellations, the human body, the interactions of animals and plants in the natural world, and just makes us sit in awe of the world in which we live.
It is an amazing thing, those early writings before, we had science as we know it today. And they were so curious and so appreciative of nature in a way that we've kind of lost because we've dissected it all. So it really is. I always find it fascinating that they have spent so much time.
This is like the analogy with politics. In science now, science gives us a power over nature, and we exploit that power in modern science. Whereas the ancient philosophers and natural philosophers, they wanted to know about nature. They didn't want to necessarily exploit it for their own benefit, and that's the biggest difference, I think, because we really do that. All these. Science has become a means to our practical ends,
right,
rather than an end in itself that we can just stand in awe of.
And he just comments about like how much we as ancients that they would sit there and look at the heavens that we just don't do, right? We're not looking up anymore. We're just looking down. And, I'm sure the students were sick of it by the end of the week, but I kept saying like, sit in wonder, sit in awe of this. And I know because there's times where he's explaining something, you're like, that's scientifically actually absolutely incorrect. But I said, you can take what he's saying and apply that with the modern scientific knowledge we have. And it's still awe-inspiring if you actually sit there and look at it as if it's the first time you're looking at it. We just get so used to it.
You're just trying to convince them, aren't you? Trying to enlarge their little minds.
Oh, yes. I mean, but there's just fascinating stuff in there. Apparently there's like this crab and mollusk that have this symbiotic relationship that when fish swim through the mollusk shells, the crab will pinch it so it'll close, and then they can both eat those fish. And I'm just like, if this is real, now granted their science was not bad, but not what we have today. I like, that's absolutely flooring. I mean, just mind-boggling.
Is it real?
I haven't looked it up. I just, but the kids were like, that's amazing if it's true. And I'm like, yeah, if it's true, it is. But I mean, there's so many things in the world that are like that. That doesn't have to be that particular thing. But yeah, I mean, even if you just look at the relationship between man and dog, right? Like we just get so used to it. But when you sit there and look at it, you're like, wow, this is really, really fascinating.
Yeah.
And that's through your metaphysics class?
Yeah, okay. Philosophy at Highlands.
He renamed it Intro to Philosophy, but I can't remember.
I renamed it Intro to Philosophy, and then Jessica Phillips said it should be Classical Philosophy, and I said, that's fine, we can call it Classical Philosophy. So now it's Classical Philosophy.
Okay, well, I still call it metaphysics too.
Yeah, well, and that's probably appropriate because one of the texts we use, Copleston, he makes the point, and Aristotle, he said, if you really follow Aristotle's metaphysics, it could be properly termed theology. And that's where the class ends, really, is in God.
Right.
And so it's just a wonderful course.
You're going to have to get there then. It would be awful if you got behind on your lesson plans and didn't get to God.
We've gotten there.
That was like Dave and I one time went to an Easter cantata at a church, just a church that we don't attend. And it ended at the cross. And when it was over, we were talking to the music minister, and I said, I've never seen an Easter cantata that ended without the resurrection. And he said, well, we ran out of time. I've never.
That's terrible.
So they just quit. I guess the minister just said you can't go over this amount of time,
And they couldn't. There was not.
Skip something,
No
but not the
modifying.
resurrection. This is Easter. It was Easter night.
Jesus was just moving a little slow.
Hopefully, they got him up the next year.
That's rich.
What are you reading, Jessica?
I want to make you all proud and say that I started the Lincoln Highway.
Oh,
What do you
And I'm
think?
liking it. It's good so far.
How,
It's really
how
good.
far are you in
It's good.
709 pages?
I don't. My page count is it's shamefully low, but
That's okay. That's okay.
That's a
It's
good,
a book
that's
to
a
be.
good story, I think, to read slowly.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So
Good
glad
for
to be
you.
starting it. It's good.
I'll
You're
be
in
excited to hear.
54.
1954,
I think.
Nebraska.
Yes. Yeah. We haven't made it anywhere else yet. I'm still in
Yeah.
Nebraska.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Love it.
yeah, it's good. Well, today we are discussing something that's woven into everything we do here at the Press, whether it's our practical planning or the larger vision for the things that we publish. And that is formation, education as formation. We're going to talk about what it is and how it affects our approach to curriculum and our materials. And Paul, I want to start with you. It sounds like a silly question to ask, but would you just define what we mean when we say education as formation? Because I think a lot of different approaches can say they're formative,
Mm-hmm.
but what do we mean when we say education as formation?
Yeah, I mean, I think fundamentally it's pointing to the belief that we believe we're all flawed and that we all need to be trained up in a way that orients us towards the good. We don't believe that if we just set a child out in the woods by himself, that he's going to turn into a great human being, right? He's not just a blank slate that's perfect. And if we keep the human influence away from him, he's going to remain perfect. We actually have to form their affections, their emotions, their intellect, and orient their spirit where God can work on it, right? I mean, and sometimes you look at educational approaches and you're just like, wow, they really do just believe that if they get out of the way, the student's going to find
Flourish.
all the truth and flourish as they ought to.
Interesting. Okay. And so can you show an example or just give a big picture of how that affects what we do practically? Like what difference does it make?
Yeah. So, for example, even with forming the affections, that's the one that I like to look at, because today it's sort of like, well, whatever people gravitate towards is fine. But in kindergarten through second grade, I mean, we've got our art cards and our music that we want them introduced to the best art that's out there, the best music that's out there, because in being exposed to it and sitting in it for years, they will grow into an appreciation for it.
And the same thing with literature. If I would not be able to read War and Peace if I read British murder mysteries all the time. Or, well, maybe I would with British murder mysteries, but not American murder mysteries. We have to also elevate their reading. That's why we read the King James Bible and why we read Shakespeare, is to elevate them and let them see that's why we memorize 70 stanzas of Horatius at the Bridge. It all will help them to be able to go further and do more.
And that's part of the broader vision.
Yes, it's all part of, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I mean, I remember, and this is just a fundamental attitude that you can have anywhere, homeschool, school, whatever it is. But, I just remember, and I think I've told the story on the podcast before, how appalled I was that like every game that came into my house as a child, when I found this out, that every game my mother vetted to see whether it had an educational purpose, how it was going to form us, that sort of thing. And I was like, that feels like a little much. But the reality is anything that we become exposed to, and if it's something that really strikes us and we take a fancy to it, it starts to form the way we think, the way we act, who we are.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious to know, what would you say to someone who might have high schoolers or older students and they might be thinking, is it too late?
Oh,
what would you say?
It's never too late. And also the education's a big part of this, but family is also a big part of it. And so the people that would ask that question and that would be worried about that are people who are raising their children in the best way that they know how. So they may be late to classical education, but they've still done a lot of things right, I guarantee. Well, and Martin, are you writing your next article for the catalog or something?
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot I'm on the show.
Yeah.
Well,
what do you think, Martin?
I just put a little message out on social media yesterday, just saying, because somebody had said something about teaching virtues, and we're going to have like this particular month, we're going to celebrate this virtue,
like a virtue of the month.
Virtue.
Yeah.
And I said, and we're going to analyze it, and I said, if you're really trying to teach character education, you don't need to be analyzing the virtue in some abstract way. You don't need to be trying to appeal to their emotions, which is a lot of what we do in there. But you do this in the common course of teaching history and literature. You have people who are exemplars of certain kinds of virtues. And you don't even really have to plan that. All you have to do is kind of read the old history. Like, we use the famous men books. And that's what they do. They show you these people. The stories are written to elicit admiration for the good things that they do, and sort of a revulsion for the bad things that they do. That's modeling. When we talk about modeling, I think character education is the best example. It's not the only one, but that's the way you teach things. Is you have a model in front. That's even if you want to be an innovator later on. Picasso was supposed to have one of the great innovators. He came up with several different kinds of modern art in the 20th century, but even to be able to do that, he had to go into the Louvre and copy the masters. For many years, that was formation.
I'm glad you've got a new appreciation for Picasso. You used to just run him down all the time.
Well, I think there's a lot of mischief in modern art, but I look at something like Don Quixote, which is just a black and white sketch, and it's just brilliant. It's utterly brilliant.
Picasso's Don Quixote? Picasso has a Don Quixote sketch?
Oh, yes.
Oh, I haven't seen that.
It's one of the... It's just a few lines, and you know exactly who it is.
Really?
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah.
Oh, we need to look that up.
No, really. I just don't have a place on my wall for it. Otherwise, I'd put a Picasso on my wall.
Well, and I think because we're diverging onto this side road, I would like to say that in the same way, I brought up to you my analogy about jazz the other day, which Martin's going to write an article. He's going to steal my idea and write an article.
Well, that has happened more than once.
Yeah, it has.
He assumes he owns the idea. He doesn't have a copyright on it.
You better write fast, Paul.
No, it's fine. I don't have time to write. Martin can write it. But, like jazz breaks the rules, right, of what music is. And at least what traditional music was at the time. And Picasso does the same thing. He breaks them, but he knows what rules he's breaking and for what effect. And I think maybe I'll put some words into Martin's mouth at this point, since he likes to take mine and put them in his own mouth, is that the issue, like the mischief Martin's referring to in modern art, is that people end up following Picasso's rule breaking without realizing what rules they're breaking and to what effect.
You can't break a rule unless you know it. If jazz musicians are famous for, what's the word?
Improvising.
Improvising. Okay. The reason they can improvise is because they know music so well. Jazz musicians know music better than any other kinds of musicians, except for maybe classical musicians. I mean, they know written music, and that's what enables them, because they know their scales, they know, and once you know that, then you can improvise really well. The people who just, want to start plunking on something, those people are never the good improvisers in music. They're not very good improvisers, but the people who really know it, they really know the rules.
And once you know
how
the
to
rules,
break them in a way.
That's right.
They're not really breaking them. They're just kind of coming up,
making them their own.
Well, they're doing music just impromptu.
Mm-hmm.
That's the ideal kind of jazz session. Is nothing is set before they're just improvising, and they're going back and forth between instruments and all this kind of stuff. They do that because they know music so well. They know the forms. So they can do that.
And my analogy, because I'm going to put this out here, and then when Martin writes the article,
everybody will know it was
but
yours.
My analogy was that actually, in what we're trying to do in education, is we're not trying to necessarily just form a piano player who is going to just play what's on the sheet, right? We're trying to train them to such a degree that they really are liberal people. They're free people that can make decisions where they know it fits, even though it may not be on the sheet. Right.
Right.
Where they can think through the principles of something and say, okay, with that principle, I apply it this way, and not just, well, that's what the rule says, so I have to do it. And so that was what I was sitting there at a jazz concert, and I started thinking about this and thought,
I think that's
analogy.
why business people now want to hire classically educated people. They don't care that they don't have the technical skills, because they can train them in that, but they know that they're able to think outside a box.
Yeah. And we were also talking about like jazz standards. So if you talk to jazz musicians, there are these certain songs that they all know because they're so great, and they have those songs memorized from front to back. And so it's not like, a lot of people today would consider that, just mindless. It's not mindless at all. It's preparing you to build on that, to do other things on the basis of that. And so I think this whole idea right now that, we think that what a lot of modern education is, they want you to start improvising from the very beginning. They don't want to teach you the standards. We're classical education teaches the standards, and then we can go off and do whatever they need to do.
Well, that's child-centered education.
Yeah, that child-centered education is like,
which is really where you started. Was talking about
you can't just start plunking on the piano. Well, you can, but it's going to take a lot longer to learn anything good, right? You learn your scales, and so I think jazz music is a great example.
And you go through the exercises, right? And that's what the process of formation is, right? Formation is not fun, right?
It is not the fun part.
It's not the fun part. And what really is the fun part is when you've gone through all of that training, where you've done your math facts to the point where you're like, I don't never want to see these ever again. But you have this facility with them that then you can forget about them, right? Because you have them whenever you need them. And that's I think when we talk about formation, I mean, you could talk about formation also in a character sense, right? But what does that mean? Which
Martin was talking about with famous men.
Yeah.
But that requires not just reading, that requires conversation also. We don't just hand students books to read. We converse with them about the failures and the successes and why, and really try to help them think more deeply than they would be prone to do if they just read without the conversation. So the conversation is very important too. I was reading some things that Cheryl wrote, Cheryl Lowe, this morning, and I mean, she never minced words. It was her talking to teachers. or to a school about her teachers. And she said, I tell my teachers that if their students don't cry when Hector is killed or when Priam begs Achilles for the body of his son, they have failed. I was like, whoa. They have failed.
You haven't properly prepared them for that moment.
Yeah, but I think that's a great point about just the idea of formation is it's not just us putting them in these structures and constraining them, but we want them to internalize those structures, right? And we do that in large part through the conversation, but also culture in the school is huge too.
Yes.
Right? And how
and
we...
in the home.
And in the home, right. But yeah.
I mean, your mother had a particular culture she was after.
Yes, she did. and I'm grateful for it. Actually, I just went back to my parents this past weekend and was like, thank you for, because some things that happened, I was like, oh, wow. What, like, you get in this bubble of what you think is normal. And then when you encounter somebody who didn't get that, and you're like, oh, I really did get something special. But it has to be internalized in some way. And by presenting it, making it their standard, their norm, but then also conversing about it and saying, this is why we do this, that, or this is why, the death of Hector is so important here. Then they can start to internalize those things.
Right. And then we're actually helping them learn how to have compassion, how to have empathy with other people. And that's a huge gift too, that an education gives them.
Well, and also I think a motivation. In many ways we are what we admire, right? And so if you teach them things that they somehow affectively connect with, to have heroes, to say, I want to be like that. It's not just that you're working on them through their assignments and they're not even realizing they're getting these forms down. It's that you want them to really begin to admire the heroes in a history,
the right people,
the people in a history story, the people in Homer's book, in Homer, and so it's not just an intellectual thing.
It's multifaceted training.
It's not even just a moral thing. It's really an aesthetic thing almost. I mean, we love the beautiful naturally, and if we can show them that these things are beautiful, then they will admire them and in some way want to imitate them.
And there's a lot of competition these days for that.
Yes.
With the media, even from since my kids were young, it would be really difficult, I think, to be a parent of young children now and try to keep them away from all of that.
Well, it is possible. I mean, we were able mostly to keep our kids away from it. We kept them away from it enough to where now they're raising their kids and it is very limited in their homes. And I think if they had not had that themselves, they wouldn't be instituting it in their own homes. But there's no phones. There's, we watch Wallace and Gromit sometimes with my grandkids over at my oldest son's house. That's but there's not, media does not control things. You just have to be careful to let things enslave you, not to let things enslave you, but to have it under control. And and it just requires a very sparse use of it.
Paul, can you give an example, since you're in the classroom, classical philosophy, can you give an example of a moment in your classroom where you can say, yeah, here's a moment where I can see the formation taking place?
Well, we could talk about, we talked about, we mentioned intellectual, moral. There's a whole slew of different things. This feels quite petty to me, but it's a current struggle. At the beginning of the year, we did a great job in uniforms and saying, like, be respectful to other people and how you dress. have your button buttoned and your tie actually cinched up, right? Have your shirt tucked in. Don't look like you just, rolled up out of bed, and it stuck for about 90% of my class. There's still a couple that, we're still struggling
God love them.
But I mean, it's even those small things, right? Of it. And that's where I want to say, like, we're trying to look at this formation from not just what they're doing intellectually. Mm-hmm. Their intellectual, mm-hmm. it will affect them. And I haven't gotten to the payoff yet. We talked about raising sisters on the nature of the gods, right? When we hit Boethius, the payoff of them taking everything we've learned this year and applying it to themselves is coming. Because right now it still feels foreign to them. This is still what the pagans thought. And then when we start dealing with how does providence and free will work and how does God allow bad things happen to good people, and that's where they all start to go, oh my gosh, like all of these tools I have now help me understand that. So I don't have a lot of examples right there ready for it. I did have a student the last time I taught this class 4 years ago. She reached out to me about 3 or 4 months after the class was over and said, I was with a group of students not from the school, and the kids were talking about how they don't believe in a God who, they don't believe in God because they can't see how he can be omnipotent and still allow for free will and still allow bad things to happen to good people. And she was like, I have an answer for you, and it, because we had struggled through it, because she'd been given all the tools, she had an answer and was able to share that to them. And I was like, okay, my work here is done. My job is done. I was so happy about that.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just one, it was multiple students who came back and told me that. And all we're doing is sitting there talking about what it means to be, right?
Well, you're guiding them.
And we get there,
guiding.
right? It feels like a small thing, right? Where you're just having conversations, but it really embeds itself into their being.
Well, and I think another aspect of this is getting outside of yourself. It's very easy for kids to get very selfish and self-centered because no one gives them anything outside themselves that would be interesting. And there was just another thing in the news about it was actually about the mother of a kid who had shot 4 people in a school. And you look at the lives of all those people when the news starts coming out about how they were raised and what their home was like, and they didn't have friends, they didn't have a good relationship with their parents, they didn't have any good relationships from people other than outside themselves. They were self-centered, and to all have, like in a classroom when you're studying, so to all be focused, the whole class, on one thing, on one person, on one story, on whatever it is, and to be discussing it and working on it together, that I think just has a moral benefit that we can't even really understand. I think it's just getting outside of ourselves. And so what model, form. What is that? That's something outside ourselves that we are in some way trying to conform ourselves to, rather than making everything conform to me. I think that's a huge problem. The whole loneliness issue. This in the next 10 years, this is going to be one of the big social issues, is loneliness, because people, they don't have friends. Nobody's giving them the kind of stuff we're talking about and the good books that we talk, because a book can serve that purpose even. A book is in a way a friend in that same way. But a lot of kids aren't getting that anymore, and they need it.
Yeah, I think that the focus outside you is sort of in a like way, not getting to choose what you are going to read, right?
Have it imposed upon you.
You are learning. You are learning respect for authority. You're learning obedience. You're learning to control yourself and your instincts, right, of what you want. I mean, those are all good things.
Yeah, it's so funny to me. It's generally in our algebra classes, those middle schoolers in pre-algebra and algebra, when the teacher insists that how they had their paper, how they show their work, and their rebellion is not doing it and it's so I'm just thinking, How hard is it to put your name where they want it, to put the page number where they want it? It's not rocket science, but it just is a huge. I can't believe he took off 10 points because I forgot to put the name of the lesson. It's they do need that. They need that discipline. I mean, you don't have to carry it too far, but it's why we teach manners in really every single week, a different manner in K to 2, and then review them in 3 to 6. It's why we teach them when they're walking down the sidewalk that they should all walk to one side so that other people can pass easily, and that they should look them in the eyes. All of those things that's not the intellectual part, but it is teaching them to be good people, good citizens.
So when we talk about formation, it's holistic.
It is, yes.
And I think that's,
yes.
Anything we've left out?
We've covered everything.
Every part of the holistic formation. Well, this is a great discussion. Yeah. Well, join us next week. And how you can prepare to join us is to read the short story by Nathaniel Hawthorne called The Great Stone Face. It's free online. You can just Google The Great Stone Face. I'm getting the title right. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And read it before next week so that you can join in our discussion. We'd love to have you back. We'll see you then. Thanks for joining us today on Classical Etc. by Memoria Press. If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, or share this episode or comment. We love to hear your questions and your comments. If you want to learn more about Memoria Press, please go to memoriapress.com. This has been Classical Etc. We're so glad you joined us, and we'll see you next time.